The next one comes from NYC Guy, and NYC Guy writes, "Hi Christy, I enjoyed the chat. Question, is there a difference between womanism and so-called white feminism? I read the feminist community is split over this issue." Well, I'm going to be honest and say I'm familiar with white feminism, but I don't know womanism. And actually, Natalie, you're a better theorist than I am. So maybe you've heard of these.
Kind of. But what you would call it? I am more on the, like I said, womanism is kind of the step further from intersectional feminism.
Let's explain it for the audience.
Okay, so what you call it? Intersectional feminism has to do with the idea of just considering other people's circumstances and trying to look at it through the feminist lens, right? I'm going to have a different experience as a bipolar, bisexual, biracial woman versus a transgender woman versus a Mexican woman or genderqueer, right? It's all about considering different circumstances of other people through a feminist lens. And you can even take it a step further into, because race is starting to, and gender issues and civil rights really within this intersectional lens. Now, womanism has to do with more of a rejection of white feminism, the historical white feminism, and also what certain white feminists kind of ignore or do not pay attention to, right? So womanism and intersectional feminism like was really the concept you started, or like theorists are really starting to get through with, like, you know, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Angela Davis. They were the ones who were saying, look, white feminism needs to understand that women of color have a different bag. That, you know, one of the things, a perfect example. So it used to be a big thing, you know, around Susan B. Anthony, Katie Stanton time, of white wealthy women not understanding the plight or the completely different version of how Black women are seen. A lot of white women were like, we need to get educated and we need to get a job and we need to go to the universities, and which is great. But the problem is that at that time, a lot of Black women and immigrant women did not have that option. They had a job, but they had a factory job, or they had to be a nanny and never see their kids, right? There's always been a different type of issue. And it's still to this day. Like, if you want to talk about the wage gap, a lot of people cite the 77 cents on the dollar, but there's also the fact that we need to recognize that Black women make 65 cents on the dollar, and Mexican women, I believe, make 54 cents on the dollar. So that's part of the reason why there is a contention and there is a split. I really and that's part of the reason I even started my channel, was just be like, hey guys, if you're confused about these things, read these books. That really gives an in-depth look into it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to just specify for the audience that white feminism is sort of what you talked about at the end, which is a really sort of narrow focus on middle class white issues, and really blind to the idea that you need to be more representative if you're going to talk about women. You can't just talk about a certain class and ethnic, you know, nexus of women.
Yeah. Yeah, and it has to do also with like the erasure of Black women. And I'll tap on this too, because, you know, one of the things that even made me start, I heard Julie Delpy, and I made a video on this, say women have it harder than African Americans. Right? It's a very insidious thing, because think about it. There are Black women, but she decided to try to like say, no, all women. But the problem is what all women tends to mean is white women. And it's like really, and that's microaggression, right? Because these are things that people don't, I know that they don't mean, and like, because I used to say very stupid attitudes too. You know, because we're all infected with it. We're not these beautiful individual thinkers that you know, I hate when people say that. Like, we're all affected by sociology and psychology of things. We got to admit it. But yeah, the erasure of Black women is a big issue. and contention, which is why people have been, I'm more intersectional feminist, or no, I am a womanist, right? Because it tends to be repeated examples over and over again. You know, one of the things I think about too is the fashion industry. Fashion industry has a lot of women and a lot of LGBTQ people in it. But the biggest problem with the fashion industry is that they are exploiting mainly, you know, women and children in factories overseas, working at slave wage. You know, Beyonce, sorry, I love Beyonce, but she's guilty because when it was found out that the clothes that she was making, guess what? They are from sweatshop factories, right? So that's what we're talking about. Like, white feminism can be an attitude, and it can sometimes be held by POC.
Right. And, you know, I want to just reflect on this because obviously I'm much older than you. And I grew up sort of like, well, 80s and 90s is when I learned about issues and the way that men and women are divided up into groups based on anatomy and heteronormativity and things like that.
Yeah.
And looking back, well, of course, I was, you know, a white girl growing up in a basically almost exclusively white rural area and watching a lot of television where everybody was white. And, you know, you had sort of maybe MTV or other things for other artists, but there wasn't a lot of space for anybody who wasn't white kind of take up any big meaningful role. And so that exposure to feminism, whether it was in politics or through film or art, was of course always framed within a white view and intended, it seemed to me, for more white audiences. And I didn't notice it at the time simply because I was too young, but now looking back, it's quite easy for me to see the way that white feminism, it was bound up in its own concerns.
Yeah.
And it needed to be corrected. I mean, a movement that is if it's going to be for all women, then it actually has to create space for all women to speak.
Yeah.
Because that's what representation means. It means having your voice out there and being heard so that your voice can be carried on and taken farther to right the wrongs in our society. That's it's a completely valid critique, I think, of white feminism. And in terms of, you know, it does seem to me very much tied with an older generation, but as you're pointing out, I think very validly, it's not just located necessarily in the bodies of white women. It's a way of not seeing things.
Exactly. And like that's part of the reason like I made that passing video, because I do pass. And for me it was a very interesting transition, because like I grew up not having a lot of friends. I was bullied. But one of the things is like as I started like learning more and more and talking more and more with my friends who are, you know, they are Black and Puerto Rican and Latina, and they were starting to explain to me some of the things that I was saying were just weird and hurtful in a way, you know? And like you said, people need to admit more. And this is like the big thing, part of the reason the womanism push and intersectional feminism push is because there needs to be more of a consideration. Humans are just very prone to groupthink, very prone to thinking my gut is right, very prone to thinking, no, I totally understand the world. I don't need to try to read up or question myself or be skeptical. Oh, I said it. But that's the thing. We are all affected by very big systems that are a lot more powerful than us. And it has to do with, have you ever seen the movie White Man's Burden?
No, I have not, but you want to summarize it quickly for others like me?
Very quick. John Travolta, Harry Belafonte, and they basically switch races. And it's like a regular movie, but they switch everything down to the T. It's where literally a Black supremacist society and white people, like they literally just switch the roles. And you see the dolls are all Black. You see that the models are all Black with natural hairstyles, and there's one white model, and like, but she has like tried to do a natural hairstyle that Black women did. Like it flipped it all and made you really realize. That was the first time I saw a movie. It made me really realize I live in one of the most fucked up places in the world because of all this subliminal stuff that I never thought about. but it made sense because growing up seeing people on the TV of like, why don't they look like me? And that has such a profound effect on little girls, to the point where when you grow up and you still notice every time you walk in a place like I live in Chicago, and you're like, I am the only person of color here, and you like do this scan, you know, it's one of those movies I would really recommend for especially white people, just to see like, look, this is what we're seeing.
Right. I had that experience at 17. I went to a conference on like racial equality in Philadelphia with my friend whose dad was the socialist librarian at our high school, and she was a socialist. And
Nice.
yeah, but when we got out there, we went to this thing in Philadelphia. It was probably 24, 25 kids, late teenagers, 17, 16, 18. And we were with two white girls, and everybody else was was Black, African American, or other, location descent. And that's when it hit me. Wow, this is what when someone else when a person who's not white enters a room, this is what it's like.
Yeah.
And just
It's
having, yes, that like it wasn't something like, it freaked me out insofar as it had never happened to me before. And I instantly, like as usually, like scan the room. Is there anyone else here like me? And there
yeah,
was my
you got a white
friend.
wake-up call.
Definitely. And that moment at 17 framed a lot of my empathy for other people's experiences going forward.
Yeah. No, yeah, and like that, yeah. So I think that is my take on that, because like, and people try to say, well, but now, like, because this is a big argument too. Oh, but the population, they're only 13% of of Black people. That's what they'll try to do. And I'm like, okay, but you know that there are other minorities in the country, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're actually the majority. And then the argument right after that, I say that, well, then they're the majority technically population wise, or they're getting, because this country is having one, more mixed children, but two, immigrants. That's it. But then they try to counter with that, but then you don't understand. It doesn't matter if there's more people of color. Perfect example, Brazil. Brazil was affected by chattel slavery, and actually it was abolished later than the United States, but they still have problems with colorism. You will look at the rich neighborhoods in Brazil, and there are mainly white people descended from white Europeans. And you look in the poorer communities and just the wealth, talk about a wealth gap, and it is mainly biracial and Black people. So,
Yeah.
and there are more Black people than outside of Africa, I believe, in Brazil. So it doesn't matter if there's more of the population majority, if you still have a white supremacist system, and especially if you've been affected by chattel slavery, and that history is effing important, you're going to still be a minority.
A friend of mine married a woman who's Colombian, and he went to visit and had the exact same observation about the way things are organized in Colombia, is that basically the lighter your skin, the more money you have.
Yeah.
And people there will deny it. They'll go, oh, no, that's not because of race. And like, well, clearly it's tied to race. I mean, just look around.
Let me tell you what, like the Spanish, the French, the Portuguese, and the English did a number, and the Germans did too. But the effect that they had on the perception of colorism, and like, even getting the terms of Black and white, and it is fascinating to see how this has like bled over for 400 years. 400 years of this, and then people try to say, but it's in the past. But it's like, but you notice this trend.
Yeah. When people create, when you create the same system again in a new generation, that's not the past. That's called the present.
Exactly. Now it could evolve and change, but wait, we can't talk about history like that. History just happened.
Well, shall we get on to the third question?
Yeah, let's get on to it. Oh, we just went off there. I popped off.
Yeah, that was wonderful. So womanism, white feminism, and I like the concept of womanism if it is inclusive of trans women as well. And
yes,
that's
LGBTQ issues, immigrant issues, religious issues.
That's a thing I definitely would support.
Definitely. Yeah.